Okay, so I believe we are live now. Speed of sound and Kafei. What did I decide? Kafei.
Kafei's cool. Or Jimmy is my first name, my real name.
Yeah, that will be better. And so I'm waiting for the YouTube stream to catch up, and it's going to blur my. God damn this thing. Okay, we're ready. So, first of all, one thing I was curious about is what is your religious background?
Um, yeah,
Like
well,
starting at age
sure.
six.
I grew up. I did grow up somewhat religious, I would say. My parents were Catholic, and then my grandmother was converted to Jehovah's Witness, and but my family, like my mom and they couldn't keep with all of that. You know, they wanted to have their religious celebrations. They wanted to celebrate Christmas and all that, and so they kind of just kept the Catholic tradition. And it wasn't enforced. Like I didn't have to go to church or anything. But like I was read as a kid, I was read Bible stories as bedtime stories, and it wasn't until like I was a teenager and I started getting into pot that I started questioning religion, and I think I wasn't like and the type of atheist that says, oh, there's absolutely no God. I know for sure. I just questioned it to the point where I guess I would have been that type of agnostic atheist that Steve McRae dislikes, the one that just says, I don't believe, but I'm not saying there is no God. And and I kind of stuck with that for a while because I guess I had the same idea that most people had, that God was something akin to Zeus, like it was if people didn't have that idea, like my mom, I talked to her about religion all the time, and her notion of God when I was growing up, she understood it as not necessarily like a being, like some kind of anthropomorphic thing like Zeus, but some type of spiritual, all-knowing force or spiritual essence. I don't know how she understood it. It's very abstract in her mind, but she that's the always the way she would describe it. And I think some religious people sometimes adhere to that, but she's definitely not someone who deeply studied theology. Like I think you've heard Bill Maher say on his show on HBO that a lot of like the majority of religious people he's come across are those ones that kind of just accept it offhand. It's religious tradition. They've treated it as software license. When you get the software license, you have all this terms and agreements that you kind of just skim through, scroll all the way down, and just hit I agree.
Right.
And he was kind of making the point that a lot of religious people, the majority, are like that. They're not really studied in theology or anything like that. They kind of just wear it as their tradition that they were born into. And it was like that for me until teenagers. Then I suppose I started reading Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and all that, and I developed this like atheistic I guess mindset. And then it wasn't until I was introduced to Alan Watts and Terence McKenna that I found out about psychedelics. And it was Terence McKenna that introduced me through the heroic dose. I had tried mushrooms as a teenager, but never at the dose range he was discussing. Like I had tried a couple of caps and stuff like that, but I've never dealt with what he was talking about with the heroic dose. So I stayed interested. Like I think I found out about him when I was like around 18 or 19. And I didn't get around to trying mushrooms out, the heroic dose, because I was looking for it for such a long time. I didn't get around to it till I was like 23. So, that's that's when I went to when I finally found someone at my work. They said, "Hey, you're always talking about mushrooms. Well, my cousin's selling some. Would you like some?" I'm like, "Yes." I'll take 5 dread grams, which is the amount that Terence recommends. And when I went to go pick them up, even the guy was like, "Hey man, a lot of people are calling me, telling me these mushrooms are really strong. You probably don't want to take the whole thing by yourself, man." And I went against that advice, and I ended up still taking Terence's advice. I had them in front of on a table, like I was on a plate on a like one of those foam plates, that you can buy, and 5 dried grams will fill that up completely. And so I had it in front of my brother, and I asked him, "Do you want to go half?" He said, "No, man, I want you to have the full experience." And so I ended up eating all 5 dried grams, And I got he was right, man. They definitely weren't lying about them being, strong mushrooms. I guess I got lucky because all that the talk of the complete mystical experience that they speak of in the Johns Hopkins research, I hit all the criteria for it in that one first try, and I've never been able to reproduce it. I try it every year, and I would say that I've never had what I would call a complete mystical experience ever since then. I think I've only really had it once.
How old were you when that happened?
23. I was 23.
23. Okay. And how long ago was that? If you don't want to tell me, that's fine.
No, I'm 34 now, so
Okay,
it's been a little over a decade, I guess. But I ever since then though, when I was 23, it launched me into studying comparative religion. I became deeply fascinated with studying the scriptures of all the world's major religions, not just Christianity. I went into Taoism, I went into Manichaeanism, I went into even, not a lot of the religions that no longer exist. I went into Greek mysticism, I went into Egyptian religion. And I found a lot of the scripture to be something that I resonated with, not just simply read. Like, after having an experience like that, you begin to resonate with the scripture. I think that's why, the professionals at Johns Hopkins, when they compare, these high doses of psychedelics to the mystical experiences, they often will say like the naturally occurring mystical experiences of the mystics. And I think the point beyond psychedelics is that it's a phenomenon in consciousness. It's ultimately, you could say it has nothing to do with taking psychedelics. And, we spoke about endogenous DMT, and I've heard your criticism of that we don't know how well the body could produce such an amount of endogenous DMT to produce something like what you see in the Johns Hopkins psilocybin-induced experiences, the mystical experiences. But I think a lot of that still is conjecture. It's still unknown. We still don't know the potential of the pineal gland and how DMT relates to consciousness in the human brain. I think that's all still being ascertained as we speak. With all the research, I think research into psychedelics and mystical experience is going to help us answer questions like that, and maybe even answer questions regarding consciousness.
Yeah, the paper I read on DMT indicated that the amount of DMT produced was sort of a biochemical byproduct, and it was so small that it was almost it was impossible that it could have any effect at all. The amount that's produced naturally, even under stress conditions or whatever. So I don't think that is the answer.
I would say it's never been truly studied. Like, we've never really studied, someone nearly, at the brink of death, the DMT levels, the spikes of DMT levels in the brain. DMT is also quickly metabolized. That's why it's such a fast-acting drug. It's only 5 minutes, but yet it's the most profound psychedelic experience there is beyond LSD and, peyote and mushrooms. Yet it only lasts 5 minutes. And, one of the reasons, and another thing, like you mentioned, it's only found in minute amounts. Yes, it's very, in the tissues of the lung, very in the liver, it's found in these very minute amounts, but it could have also something to do with the fact that it's so rapidly metabolized in the human body. Like, the human body knows exactly what to do with DMT. And Richard, you're familiar with Rick Strassman, right? The guy who did the DMT molecule book based on the studies he did in the mid-90s with DMT.
Right.
Well, he's continuing that research today, and he's doing more research with DMT. He just recently picked it back, and he did this real interesting, I think it was on rats, and he was giving them these massive doses. Like, every 4 hours he would give them this massive dose of DMT. And he found that in the rats, they weren't building any type of tolerance to DMT. Their body was accepting it. It metabolized it. It's almost like the body wants it. I don't know how to describe that, but like it doesn't show any detrimental effects, and the body doesn't develop any type of immunity against it. Real interesting work that he's doing. But yeah, like I said, I think this is still all not pinned down. I think a lot of research still needs to be done to definitively say that you can't necessarily access this naturally, because I think that's the biggest argument. That we can't get to it naturally. I don't know if
Are you familiar with Andrew Newberg?
Yes, of course.
Okay. He's the CAT scanner. He CAT scans people meditating and stuff like that. But the thing is, the people that are looking for DMT, basically, are looking at DMT, are looking to find basically a natural path. So a natural path to the spiritual experience, right? So they're trying to make a connection, and they're trying to do it with a chemical, and they're trying to make that connection. And I don't think there's a lot of research that indicates that it's much more complicated than that. Natural mystical experiences involve a whole lot of sort of a meltdown between the temporal parietal lobe and between basically in the part of your mind that determines who you are, what you are, where you are, and how you relate to the universe. So every day when you wake up, you basically have this little motor that starts up that tells you who you are and what you are, right? It's like a little motor that starts up, and your mind starts to make sense of the world. You basically can see the world out here, and you make sense of it. Well, there are a couple of things that melt that down, and one of them I've told you about is epileptic seizures, and they actually cause religious experiences. But I wanted to ask you about Ellen Watts. What exposure to Ellen Watts have you had?
I've read some of his books, not all of them. I listened to probably a good majority of his lectures, and there's still some I hear new today. It's like I thought I listened to everything there was to Terence McKenna, but no, sometimes I'll find something I never heard. But a lot of
he has more audio recordings, I think, than anybody else in the world or something.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I thought maybe Terence McKenna held the title for that, but
no, Watts was on the radio for 10 hours a night, I think 7 days a week for a long time.
Wow.
They recorded everything. And then he did a lot of talks at the same time. So I was exposed to Watts through his books only, not through his talks.
Yeah.
Because that was back in 1966.
Yeah, you see, like, it's very different, and maybe that's a generation gap right there. I was working a data entry job for processing child support payments for the Attorney General, and basically all I had to do is all day was listen to stuff. And at first it was music, then I got bored of that, and then it became like comedians, and then I got bored of that. Then it became philosophy, and that's when I started listening to Watts pretty much every day at that job, man. Like from start to finish. Like sometimes in this 12-hour shifts, and I would listen to Watts all day, man. That's my exposure to Watts. So when you say like he has a real big vast audio library, I think I've listened to at least 70% maybe of that library, if not more.
Yeah, I don't know if it was like 10,000 hours, or I can't remember. It was a lot of hours.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's that high. I just heard a ballpark. But I was exposed to Watts through his book, and that was when I was just about to turn 16 years old. And I told you about that experience I had on the 24th of December. And I can't remember. I can't do the math on what year that was. But I would have turned 16 the next year, so that would have been 1967. So,
and you said it was like a natural experience, right?
It was a natural experience, yeah. And it was a result of reading Beyond Theology. And it was an amazing experience, and it lasted about 3 days to a week. And it was sort of pretty much everything that I heard described in spiritual experiences. So I was reading that. Anyway, and it was a result of a thought trip. But the thing is that one of the things, stress is a big factor in having a spiritual experience. So if you're at the end of your rope, if you're an alcoholic, or you've hit your bottom, or you're about to have a nervous breakdown. In fact, a lot of people call spiritual experiences, they mistake them for a nervous breakdown, and they end up in the hospital.
Oh yeah. Are you familiar with delirium tremens. Have you heard that?
Yes. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
from
it's a yes, it's the withdrawal symptoms of severe alcoholism. And a
yeah.
lot of people do describe those experiences as spiritual. You know, they see demons, they see angels, you know, they see people,
Oh
they see
yeah.
imagery that's trying to help them and survive. And
Right.
yeah,
Another
I know.
thing I've done. I've stayed up for 9 days at a time, drug induced, and you see some pretty weird shit when that happens to you. But anyway,
Yeah,
let's see. So I wanted to figure out. You said you were a pan experientialist,
yeah,
right?
I definitely lean towards that more so than anything. Yeah.
Okay. So how would you describe that compared to panpsychism and panentheism?
Well, okay. Well, I think it's synonymous with panpsychism. I think it's a bit different from panentheism because it's not necessarily describing God unless you want to equate God to consciousness. You know, pan experientialism is saying that in a sense that all there is consciousness, and
Okay.
you know, uh, that energy itself, that the relationship between matter and energy is one that's intertwined with consciousness, and even the inanimate matter that you see that you may think as a not possessing consciousness is conscious, but to such a minute and elementary degree that you can't recognize it as such as consciousness.
Okay. So how do you compartmentalize my consciousness and your consciousness?
Um, well, I would relate it, you know, entirely to, I guess, you know, in psychology, the ego. You know, you speed of sound. I don't know. If you show me your real name, I'm sorry. I apologize for I've forgotten. But
Call me Speed. You can call me
Speed.
Speed.
All right,
Yeah.
Speed talks to Kafei. We have the appearance that Kafei responds and speaks back to Speed. You know,
Right.
but you know, from I guess a mystic standpoint, no such thing has taken place. Consciousness has spoken to consciousness,
Okay.
and we just perceive it on the level of ego. To that creates the division. You know, and I caught into, I think, non sequitur once, trying to. A lot of the mystics or a lot of the theologians, when they would speak of their original sin, they would speak of it in this form that the fall was this fall into this perception where we perceive ourselves as separate from nature. Maybe you're familiar with Alan Watts as the skin encapsulated ego.
Yep.
You've probably heard that term. But
Yes.
yeah, that's precisely what Watts was aiming at towards that. It was his way of describing what Freud would call the ego. You know, oh no, I mean, I don't know if you're going to cut in right there, but you know, so like, if you want to contrast this, like, consider, are you familiar with the term eternalism?
Heard of it, but can't really put my head around it right now.
Well, you've heard, I don't know if you've heard some of my discussions with Max Freakout. You said you came across.
Yeah, listen to a few.
He speaks of, okay, Einstein had this notion of the block universe.
Yep.
And so
does,
you know.
So does Leo Phileas.
Yes. And so, you know, the block universe is something that's like an object frozen in time. It's kind of like, let's say that the consciousness is akin to a projector, you know, like a reel of film. And the projector is consciousness. You know, the way we perceive it right now, it's projecting like a movie. But the entire reel of film is something that is concrete. It's something that's frozen in time. It can't change. You know, the reel of film itself. So the block universe encompasses, you know, everything from the moment of the Big Bang, the birth of the universe, to the supposed death of the universe. that would be the block universe frozen in a predetermined, pre-existing past and future. And collectively, Einstein called it the block universe. He was a hard determinist. And so the contrast is the ego between that. You see, the ego is something inside of that thinks it's something separate from it, but it doesn't realize it's total unity with the block universe. I don't know if you see where I'm getting that with that.
But God, there's so many questions here. Okay, first of
go
all,
ahead.
4.5 billion years ago, before there were human beings or even bugs, where was the consciousness? What was happening?
I think about these questions too, man. And they say in a lot of the mysticism of religions that it's a potential. That I don't. You've probably heard the Hindu idea where God plays an eternal game of hide and seek, and so like you have the Brahman, which but in potential represents every single possible permutation that can happen inside a universe, and so you have there's a view in physics that they call it the Big Bang and the Big Crunch. So you have the Big Bang of the universe, and that ultimately ends in the Big Crunch. In the Hindu view, it's cyclical, such that you have an eternal string of Big Bangs and Big Crunches happening eternally at all times. But they're all happening. There was on your, I don't know who mentioned it. There was someone that mentioned on your stream earlier something about they went into video games and I mean, was it you that went into like the programming and the possible?
Can you? That was Manny Karen. He was talking about design, or about the idea of design. God designed the universe, that sort of thing. The Christian creation. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, and someone said like if you're. Oh yeah, go ahead. If you have a question, go ahead, man. If you want to.
Well, okay, there's a whole bunch of questions back here. Like, okay, we have Kafei's mind, and we have Speed's mind over here on this side, right? And we have Kafei's mind, and I don't know anything about what's happening in your mind right now. You don't know anything what's happening in my mind. How does that hash out to ego? And what would happen if what would be the possibility of us joining our minds and me knowing what's in your mind, what's in your consciousness? How could that happen? Do you believe that could happen?
Okay. Well, the way I see it is that you remember. I don't know if you remember Watts speaking about this metaphor of a spotlight consciousness in comparison to floodlight. I don't know if you remember him making that distinction.
Yeah, and, concentric meaning of concentrate. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And so, the ego is kind of if you consider your life, you're only ever when I had an atheistic mindset, I believed that I only understood everything from the vantage point of what I could experience through my senses, through my sense of touch, vision, smell, and because I absorbed through those senses, whatever that collected, that was my spotlight consciousness. That's what my ego, to its furthest ability, could know. And I think a lot of people operate like this, they only can absorb from the vantage point of their ego, what their ego can perceive. And when I approached Adam Watts and mysticism and so forth, there's a different way of approaching knowledge, in which there is ego death, there is the dissolution of the ego, in order to gain a certain knowledge. One of my favorite scientists that speaks on this is Bill Richards. I don't know if you've heard some of his lectures, but he
the guy from Johns Hopkins.
Yes.
Yeah, he's full of shit.
Well, I mean, I like some of his metaphors, man. He will say, like it is an ego death what we're talking about when we speak of like these high dose psychedelic experiences, and there is this ordinary sense of yourself that completely is gone inside this experience. That's why they call it ego death, because that doesn't exist anymore. But that is necessary to receive the insight. So your ordinary of your sense of yourself dies, and then you have this rebirth after the experience. But in the interim, in the memory banks, you have this memory of what happened during that. And I think that's what's helping people. That's what's like in the scientific studies, it's showing that's being so beneficial. One of the big points that they're trying to point out is that it's not some pharmaceutical that you have to take over and over and over and over and over, like the way, a prescription drug you have to take daily. This is a single high dose, and it's the memory of the experience that is helping these people. That's beneficial. So if it's the memory and it's only one dose, then, it's a big compromise to the pharmaceutical companies, because they can't keep on dosing people every day again and again. This hits the root of the issue.
Yep.
I mean, that's why it's a big deal.
Okay, but why? Okay, so you put you put a lot of faith in the ego part of it, but okay, you have objects out here in the universe. Okay, these are little objects in the universe that I'm drawing the blue around here, and you have yourself. Basically you're perceiving things in the universe. And then you have this ego melting experience. Well, if I have another person out here with a different ego and he's experiencing different things in the universe, there's no way that I can cross over to his thing. That's never been done. There's never been a connection between the two.
Yeah, I didn't address that. I can try to, man. I mean, I don't think that, people could read each other's minds, but I think people can resonate. If they're operating on a certain frequency, this happens all the time. Like this is how people, how friendships happen sometimes, because you find out that the person you're talking to at your job just so happens to like every single band you like and comedian you like, and so on and so forth. It's not necessarily reading someone's mind, but you have such a same mindset that you can kind of predict how people think, because you already know how they are. But I don't think someone could read someone's mind in the way you're saying. Like even with the psychedelics, like it's not even mentioned like that. Like you're probably familiar with ayahuasca and the Icaros. The songs that the shamans sing. There is a synesthesia that occurs where the sound, a specific frequency of sound creates a visual image in front of someone, in a visual hallucination from sound. They call this synesthesia. And sometimes it could be a collectivized vision, because all the people in the ceremony witnessing the shaman and hearing these frequencies, it's somehow occurring. The synesthesia, the hallucinogenic synesthesia occurring, is somehow similar to people, such that they can turn to each other and describe exactly what they're seeing to one another. And it's because the sound is bending the visual imagery very similarly for everyone. I think that may be more what's going on. And so originally they thought that the ayahuasca was some kind of telepathy. I don't know if you remember, that was the original name for DMT. They thought it was telepathy. They thought it was some type of thing that could let you read someone else's mind. But when they figured out further, no, that's not necessarily what's going on. I think they eventually arrived on, hallucinogens, psychedelics, entheogens. People have their preferred terms.
Right. So when you have, this person here and this person here, and they're having resonance together, but you've never had this resonance with a person that you've never met, or a person that isn't born yet. So you only have this resonance with people you come into physical contact.
Yeah, when you come in physical contact.
I'm wondering how you get rid of physicality so much. I
don't necessarily get rid of physicality. I think I rather see them as intertwined, like the yin and the yang. You know, like you can't have one without the other. You know,
how do you make sense out of any of that?
So, I mean, yeah, no, it's hard to. I think that's why, you know, religious debate still exists today, because people can't make sense of these things, and you know, that's why I really like that you invited me to your stream, man. But you know, I wish, like, because I'm a mod on Smokey's channel, and he's never invited me for a one-on-one. Yeah, he has, but he's never made it happen, and you made it happen. And I think it's because you have a deeper interest in him in these topics.
If you challenge Smokey, let me know how that turns out.
I wouldn't challenge him. It would be, I mean, because I'm ultimately on his side.
Lick his butt instead. As long as you're licking his butt, he's good.
Well, no, I wouldn't do that either.
Challenge him on religion.
I would try to challenge him a little bit, in the sense that I spoke to Jill once. You're familiar with Jill, right? The Jesus is Lord. I can send you the link when I encountered him. He still has it posted on his channel. And we got in discussion, and you know, he's very adherent to Christian doctrine. You know, that I think him, a lot of Christians, maybe even Smokey, they cannot consider a truth outside of their own religion. Right. And you know, I think that's a fundamental flaw. I don't want to say that as a mod of Smokey's mod, you know what I mean? But if I was going to challenge him, it would be on that point. It would be that I think all religions share a common core, and that's what I believe the science is really pointing at. That you know, the common core is mysticism, and mystical experiences are dynamic. They, you know, we can't generalize these things. They occur on a very wide spectrum of the way they manifest themselves. And the reason that people are so ignorant about them is because many people haven't had a mystical experience on any side of the spectrum, be it the weak side or the very profound side, you know. So they're ignorant of the entire spectrum, and so when you try to have a conversation like this, it's hard because you have to, in a way, you know, you have to update these outdated computers. You have to fill people in. You have to, you know, school them on the recent science that's been established, and that's been my effort, man. That's what I do. That's the whole reason I am passionate about speaking on these topics.
Yeah, and I'm okay. So my experiences were with Ellen Watts were okay. I was 15 years old. Just got out of for a summer, or let's see, we'd gotten into extreme skepticism, and I was having a great deal of trouble at home with my alcoholic father. And I hang on a second here.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So then I started reading. A friend of mine, I think Alan Watts' Beyond Theology, had just come out, and we stole it at a drugstore. And my friend gave it to me, and I was reading it, and basically, I was an atheist before, and then I had that spiritual experience which lasted for 3 days, and that was a ego melting experience where basically, so it was an ego melt in that I had these, you know, I had this dad, right, going on, my dad, and I had me, and I had my mom sitting out here somewhere not defending me, which I resented, and we had this whole interaction going on, right? And I was seeing everything from my point of view. But for 3 days, I all of a sudden could see my father's side of the picture and my mom's side and everybody else's side all at once, and everything sort of melted down. But I was an atheist before, during, and after, okay? Because all of the Ellen Watts that I ever read, that's all he ever talked about is psychological Buddhism, or what would hash out as psychological Buddhism. In other words, he was making a point that we were human beings. And we were just human beings, and we had this mind, you know, we had this brain, right? Physical, and we, you know, we interacted with the world and with other human beings, and these other human beings had their little ego going on. And basically, he allowed me to see that I was a part of the world, that he considered us a part of everything. In other words, there is no, I mean, there's this idea that, you know, we're this little thing and we're born and we grow up and we go through this life and then we disappear out here, right? And the thing we're doing is we're accumulating memories and personality traits and habits. And habits are what Buddhists call karma. Basically, karma are your habits that you accumulate throughout your life. And then at some point, if you're lucky and you attain nirvana, basically, you you have this moment, where you realize that you are not these that you are more connected with the entire universe. Okay, but none of it denies just a regular physical universe with humans that started existing about 2.2 million years, 3 million years ago, and we have physical minds, and that's how we encounter the universe. The idea behind giving up your ego is realizing that, like, when we think about, oh, I'm going to die, and then I have all these attachments to my memories, to my friends, to my children, to my car, to my egg salad sandwich. And he was trying to explain that you can give that up in life, that you can give up these attachments to the point where you do not have to be anxious about having things and whatever. Okay. So that was all I ever got out of Watts. And I never saw him ever say that the universe was consciousness or that there was something called God out there, basically. But
Yeah.
he talked about metaphors for God. Okay. And he explained what the metaphors for God was. God was everything. And God was sort of this dissolving into the universe. So then I went on to then after about 3 or 4 days, I decided I wanted to keep this experience forever because I was having such a good time. I mean, I had this just incredible peace of, everything was peaceful, and somehow the world was on fire. It was like as if somebody shone a 500-watt light bulb on everything, and it was just all lit up, and I wanted to hang on to it. And as soon as I started hanging on to it, I wanted to keep the experience for later. I lost the experience because that isn't what the experience is. The experience is not hanging on, but the experience is letting go. Okay, so then I looked further into Watts, and he came up with this odd thing where he contrasted belief. So we have a belief right here, right? We believe we're a human being. We believe in Christianity. We believe in our ego. We have all these ideas in our head, right? But he was saying, no, faith is the opposite of belief. And what you do is you let go of all belief. You empty your mind with Zen. So this is Zen Buddhism, which Watts was pretty big into. And when you have Zen Buddhism, you're operating just specifically as the animal that you are. And so any belief you have basically gets in the way of your ego. Now, you told me that you've had these experiences on mushrooms, and now you've launched into this phase of your life, which I had gone through for like 12 years with psychedelics, where I tried to recapitulate, recapture that experience and try to bring it, try to grab onto it and try to find it. And basically what I see you doing, and the criticism I've had of you all along, is that you've taken your little ego and you've traded it for a bigger ego, which is the beliefs you have about this, all this research you're doing into all these different religions and whatever are still beliefs. Okay. But if you want to have that experience, you will let go and you will have faith, and you will empty your mind. So Zen is empty mind, basically. And what I've done over, probably more so over the last 14 years of my sobriety, is I have emptied my mind pretty much of as many of those kinds of beliefs as I can. And I have sort of like settled down into this peaceful ability to let go of my life. I'm 69 years old, and I have to be letting go. It's not time for me to be hanging on, that sort of thing. So anyway, but you have all these ideas, but these ideas, how are they different than any other ideas, and how do you hash them out?
Well, I really think when people approach Alan Watts or any author for that matter, you're necessarily going to approach them to your level of understanding. And that's not to put you down. What I'm trying to say is that a lot of what Alan Watts spoke about was on the basis of an experience, which we're calling mystical experience, or what Alan Watts called cosmic consciousness. And he had never truly experienced that. He spent a good deal of his life himself speaking on these topics, and he didn't necessarily have his own mystical experience until he was approached by a colleague of Humphrey Osmond, who dosed Aldous Huxley, and who prompted Aldous Huxley to write The Doors of Perception and the books that he wrote after his psychedelic his experience with peyote. Alan Watts was dosed by this same a colleague of Humphrey Osmond with LSD, and because he recognized in Watts that Watts hadn't truly had anything close to a mystical experience with LSD. He was describing these recreational experiences, and so he dosed him. And Watts, finally admitted, that he did at that point. He was just encountering it. He just encountered a mystical experience for himself. Prior to that point, he had never had it. Not through natural methods, not through, because he did meditate. And meditation became more of a practice that was inspired by his psychedelic experience. Like to a lot of people who have it, they want to recapture it through meditation. And what I'm trying to say is that I completely agree with you that Watts was trying to describe human beings as natural. In other words, like he even considered all the founders of the major religions as natural as you and I. Human beings. Like we're not talking we're not, in other words, we're not talking about anything supernatural in the sense outside of that defies the laws of physics in the sense of magic or something like that. We're talking about a phenomenon that's completely natural. And but I believe Watts did have this, and when he would say, he's like, you can call it anything you like. He had this very interesting talk. I don't know if you ever heard this one, but he titled it "The Smell of Burnt Almonds."
The what now?
The smell of burnt almonds. Are you familiar with that one?
No.
Okay. Well, his point with that is that he was describing someone in the story that was gonna, they were gonna take this massive dose of LSD, and they had a paper and pen, and they were gonna finally pin out the true secret of the world. The 1-inch equation that all physicists are looking for to solve, M theory or something. Like, they're gonna find out the secret to God. And he got down, and when he came down from his LSD trip, he looked on the paper, and it said, "All the world is the smell of burnt almonds."
Yeah.
And Watt's point with that is that it doesn't matter what you call this source. You can call it God, you can call it Brahman, you can call it this, you can call it that. People relate to it in different ways, but it's not a metaphor. It's something that mystics claim by direct experience. And the reason it's so hard to talk about, and I get an impression sometimes when I talk to you, Speed, that you haven't had it. The last conversation I had with you was on the phone a while back. I don't know if you recall. But I was asking you, I'm like, hey man, have you ever had the heroic dose? And you said, no, not yet. I'm planning to do it with a couple friends. And I don't know if you ever got around to it.
No, I think you got that wrong. I'd been working with a friend and considering doing very, very small doses of psilocybin. But I'm a sober alcoholic, so I've been putting it off for 2 years or whatever.
Yeah.
But I wasn't planning on doing a high dose at all. Ever again. I have done heroic doses of a lot of shit, including LSD, and I'm not interested in going that far again because it isn't necessary.
Well, what would you consider a heroic dose with LSD? How many micrograms?
I think, I estimated the stuff that I was doing at around 150 micrograms, and I took 20 of them. So that's around 3,000 micrograms. And I have 1,300 micrograms of LSD is wall melting, basically the entire universe. Your field of vision starts to turn into circles and folds, and and you pretty much lost it. But roughly, I took roughly 3 times that amount,
Yes.
and it brought me to a certain place, but it wasn't anything like the natural experience that I had. It wasn't as powerful as the natural experience I had. And I've had lower doses of LSD, and I've come closer to that experience. So I can understand how LSD turns on that experience, and there's very good physiological reasons why it would do the same thing as a massive nervous breakdown, basically a TP junction breakdown. So anyway, and then I had a couple. Let's see, some really another incredible experience where I took a massive overdose of methamphetamine, and it should have killed me, and I don't know why it didn't. But I ended up for 1 week. Methamphetamine disappears from your system within 4 hours. You pee it out, it's gone.
Yeah.
No longer affecting you. And anyway, this lasted for a week. This really strange, uncomfortable religious experience where I was evaluating my screwed up life. Of course, I was sick and a drug addict at the time. So because of that, I was not as healthy as I was when I was 15 years old. But this experience had to have been the same thing happening to me. It was remarkable. But so I've had several different experiences like this.
That would be a heroic dose of LSD. There is, I don't know if you heard of that CNN woman who took, I think, 55,000 mics. 55,
55,000?
Yes, 55,000.
Wouldn't that kill you?
No, she survived. I mean, it lasted like 3 days, but she was able to come out healthy, and she said she's in a better psychological state than she was before. That's another punch to, I think, why psychedelics are not something that are detrimental. That's that's like it's 50 times more the dose he took. And but what you took is considerably high dose. If you're being honest, and I hope you are. I'm not saying I doubt that you're not, but usually what people report at that point, when they speak of these high doses and the complete mystical experience, you said you were awash in patterns. I don't know if you mentioned that. Okay. Well, Terrence used to say a lot of people don't realize how malleable consciousness is, and at the heights of these psychedelic states, the visual cortex. You could argue that the visual cortex is being bombarded, but it's almost as though, to give an analogy, you're probably staring down at your screen while you're having this conversation with me, right? And you can see in the peripheral of the background, the room you're in, and the things in the background, the shapes and so forth. Well, imagine if your brain just suddenly decided to show you every single pattern it could possibly generate in one experience simultaneously. That's a very hard thing to imagine, and a lot of people haven't experienced that, and yet when that happens, what unfolds is complete geometric patterns, as people describe on DMT, that replace your visual perception. And so your entire, there is nowhere for you to recognize that you have a body in relation to anything else, because everything is kaleidoscopic fractal mandalic imagery that's folding into itself. And but the thing is, this is a universal experience. This is what people experience all the time. Even if you say that you took a high dose of LSD and you experienced this, I really believe what the science is trying to say is that this is a universal phenomenon in consciousness that has been happening for millennia, that the major religions are in a way based on this. I don't know if you caught, because our major contention up to now, I think, was that can you produce these in a natural state? You had a sort of criticism towards that. And
so you don't believe you can do it naturally?
well, with the amount of skepticism I have, but I've also heard many accounts to the contrary. I think it can happen naturally. However, there are many people who disbelieve that. Like my friend Max Freakout completely rejects natural occurring mystical experience, and he is aligned with Michael Hoffman's ego death theory, which says that, kind of aligned what Terence was arguing, that all religion is based in hallucinogenic practices. And I don't know if you caught Graham Hancock's most recent stream with Joe Rogan. If not, I will definitely send it to you. He had another scholar aside from Graham who was actually investigating whether this is a possibility, and he's developed so much evidence for it. He's visited these Greek sites. He's found relics of how he's been able to produce hypothesis of how these psychedelics were produced, because they have the material evidence inside some of these vases. They have preserved barley. They have preserved rye, which is what they use to make LSD. It's a precursor of LSD. In the relics of these Greek Eleusinian mysteries, the practices, there's a term for it. I can't remember at the moment, man. I'm sorry. But the kaikion. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But yeah, the kaikion. I mean, it was this major event in Greece that all the major philosophers partook in. And it was a hallucinogenic beverage of some sort that these scholars today are trying to figure out what exactly. They've produced enough evidence to show that they were definitely dealing with some sort of psychedelic, beverage. They just don't know exactly what the production was. It's not some form of ayahuasca. They think it's probably some kind of infected rye, which would make the precursor. It's LSA, the precursor of LSD. And he's not only solidifying this within Greek religion, they're calling this the Soma of Hinduism, the Eucharist of Christianity. They're establishing a lot of evidence that psychedelics or hallucinogens may have very well play a role in the origins of religions. I don't know if you've caught that. It was on CNN recently. It was recently posted on CNN.
Somebody linked me something on. No, that was on 2020 or one of those. I think on Johns Hopkins stuff, but I'm not sure about the CNN thing. I don't think I've seen that. This is a CNN article on that woman that took 55,000 times the normal. What the fuck was it? 550 times the normal recreational dose. So she took. So what? How many micrograms was this? Normal recreational.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100. Or wait a minute. So about 100 micrograms is a real mild. Well, not mild, but a good recreational level for LSD. 100 micrograms.
If you claim that, man, I guarantee. I just want to say this. I guarantee, dude. Like, you're an atheist that I've encountered that most atheists have never claimed this sort of dose. I've spoken to. You're familiar with Eric Murphy, Talk Ethan, I'm sure.
I do know him.
I got him to admit that he's never went that high, man. He only took like 3 grams. I'm like, dude, you're not getting anywhere close to what these, scientists are talking about with complete mystical experience, or these mystics or theologians are talking about with direct revelation, theoria, so forth, hypnosis, direct revelation.
So where do you land? You haven't really committed yet. Are you saying that you can't do it naturally?
Oh no! I really believe that there may be a natural case for it. I think the reason why it's so obscure these days is because when I study Jainism, for instance, I don't know if you ever studied Jainism, but they were naked ascetics, and they had such a respect for life that they wouldn't even harm bugs through harvesting potatoes. So they would opt not to harvest potatoes the risk of killing bugs or harming bugs. There were, in other words, I kind of perceive them as a society or culture that cultivated mystical experience, these experiences of direct, unconditional love. Uh, uh, and so they lived a very strict, vegan life. In other words, I think you have to be a very pure, healthy person and strict maybe vegetarianism or strict vegan to even approach a natural way to experience this stuff. Like if you're not,
so you don't think it's possible to naturally approach
in our days where we're bombarded with McDonald's and all the bullshit we're fed at Walmart and our local grocery store, hell no. You have to live healthy beyond that. And I think that when we talk about these ancient religions, we're talking about when things like grocery stores didn't exist. People got their shit naturally. Like it was the direct source. It was, like it's not some watered down bullshit that we're spoon fed today. That's not considered. Like people say,
So the experience I had when I was 15 years old that changed my life, you don't believe that was a real?
No, I think it may have been real for you, and the reason it may have been real for you is precisely because this was prior to whatever drug addiction or whatever you had following that. Remember, you were young, you were youthful, your mind was healthy, and so you were more prone to have such an experience.
I think I don't know. There's many accounts of spiritual experiences of people of all ages. And I think Paul, the biblical Paul, I think he described one that sounded like that's kind of what happened. And I think they are the foundations of a lot of religious, at least had a part in religious formation or the formation of the leaders of religion. But they're basically.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, they're basically people that did what Ellen Watts suggests, and that's quit thinking so fucking much. Stop thinking. But Jay Patrick, I don't know how the Spatchcock. Basically, he asked about the stoned ape theory.
Yeah.
And
I could touch on it. Well, this is the contention, I think. So either there is a natural way we can have these experiences, or there is Terence McKenna's notion that the whole reason that we're self-reflective, self-reflective humans with self-reflective consciousness in the first place, is precisely because we had a symbiotic relationship to psychedelics. That was Terence's argument.
The robot.
In other words, if you consider like in evolutionary biology a symbiote the other, like in other words, the mushroom gives rise to human consciousness. That's the primary contention, because you're kind of saying that I don't know if you've ever heard Watts say this. He said the relationship between bees and flowers is so intimate that you couldn't have a world without that had bees without flowers or flowers without bees. They imply with in one another in such a harmonious way of interrelationship, of symbiosis. That the bee represented the flower and the flower represents the bee. And I don't know if you've heard Watts say that they're kind of like the same species. Like if you're talking about flowers or you're talking about bees, you're talking about the same species.
Yeah,
because you can't have one without the other. And so I think that's how Terence thought about the psychedelics and our evolution, that it was solely generated. We generated this human consciousness, this self-reflective human consciousness in the first place, because we had this relationship with mushrooms for centuries. In other words, it didn't go on for just, thousands and thousands of years. It went on for tens and tens of thousands of years that we were imbibing mushrooms in our evolutionary process, And so that is contrasted with the idea that it's embedded naturally within us, that it's something that we all have the potential for. It just takes a very strict regimen of a healthiness, of vegetarianism, of, you know what I mean, like that's what they're trying to contrast it to. And when you ask me which do I agree with, you know, either it's a symbiotic relationship, or we have the potential, or we all have the potential within it ourselves, not as just human beings, but as sentient beings, as anyone who is able to attain sentience. You know, not just human beings, but let's say there's creatures or other, uh, you know, uh, um, lines of down the evolutionary lanes that develop sentience, that are able to have this experience naturally. I think that's the main contention. Like, either it's a symbiotic relationship, or either it's embedded within us, and we can access it naturally. And oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Do you believe in evolution?
Of course, yeah, I do. That's why when I first, I mean, when Smokey made me a mod, I was, I mean, I don't mind it. It was the first person that made me a mod on YouTube, but that's why I kind of admired him. Like, man, maybe Smokey's, he has the open mindedness to, he likes what I'm saying. But at the same time, I was trying to figure out his perspective, and I wasn't very familiar with Oder's creationism, which is the position he holds. I don't know how familiar you're with it, how long you've been studying that, but I was just recently introduced. Through Smokey, I started studying on Oder's creationism.
Okay. So you believe in abiogenesis and like no intelligent design, right? Things happen naturally, that life developed naturally.
Abiogenesis. Well,
that would be
yes. Yeah, I think abiogenesis creates the division that, that's why when you asked earlier, do I consider myself a pan-experientialist? Like, I don't think consciousness is a feature that you can remove from the material reality at any point. And I think abiogenesis tries to make it seem as though consciousness is removed at one point and introduced at another point. It kind of makes a division. It separates it.
But you have a belief that consciousness is supreme. That basically something called consciousness is what is
yes,
the essence of the world.
And it's because my writing, it's not necessarily something that I came to on my own. By studying all the major religions and all these the most recognized mystics, of each of the major religions, be it Meister Eckhart, or someone like Gautama, or they all emphasize this. It's not something that necessarily I'm saying, but it's something I recognize through all the major religions. It's a common theme.
Yeah. So
that's and I'm trying to pay attention to the comments too. It says which
Jay
God revealed to him. Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, like, I've spoken to Jay, like he knows that I've spoken about the perennial philosophy, and like, I've been on Steve McRae's channel, and there is this point that I tried to make that, I don't know, I tried to bring it up to Eric, and it took him a little while, but I don't know if he even got it or not, or if he tried to pretend that he got it. But it's on my channel, and anyone can watch it. But I try to say that there's this point that I brought up. Maybe you're familiar with it, Speed. But I brought it up a few times, and it's that whenever you look into the dictionary, you always see the atheist as someone who disbelieves God. But if you dissect language, like if you really believe in evolution, the etymology or the word God hasn't been around forever. It's only been around for maybe the last 2,000 years, or maybe even some people. Well, go ahead. Some people speculate that God may have been rooted in a shortcut, or abbreviation of Gautama, of the original Buddha who lived 500 BC, 500 years before Christ. Or are they related to a Greek, the Gotin, like there's a Greek word that resembles God, and they find the etymology there. My point is that it doesn't matter where they find the etymology of this term. Because if you go back into history, if you go all the way back to like Hinduism, for instance, the word God didn't exist at all during those times. And the with the way they resonated, or the way they would express the ultimate divine in their view, they would say Brahman. And I don't know if you remember the Taoist sage. He said the name that can be named is not the eternal name. And a way to say that is that there is a source that I think we're pointing to, and various cultures and religions will develop a name for it, but that doesn't mean that that's the concrete and forever stamped name for it. The universe itself, even like I think Neophilus says the universe is not finite, or maybe he says the universe may be eternal. Even if let's say, even if you consider that the universe is finite, it dies, that means the next universe that sprouts, they're going to develop a name for the source. It may not be any name we're familiar with. It may not be any name associated to any religion we know on Earth. It may be a different set of syllables entirely. But the point is that no matter what you refer to, I think this is the point of Adam Watts when he said, all the world is a smell of burnt atoms. He said that this guy may have been very disappointed that he took all this LSD to find the ultimate truth. And then when he went back to his paper, all he saw was the words, all the world is a smell of burnt almonds. But what the more profound thing to say, Adam Watts goes to say, is that it doesn't really matter the name that you put on the source. It's all ultimately pointing to one unity. You could say that it's nameless, that it's eternally been there, but that's how all the major religions perceive it. That it's.
So what do you think an atheist? What do you think? What is an atheist? And how are you different than an atheist?
Well, often, a lot of discussions with me, man, like when I argue with atheists, I know it probably doesn't apply to you, but when I argue with atheists, they have preconceived notions of what they think God is. Like either it has some kind of anthropomorphic qualities, or Meister Eckhart put it as dust. Simple people imagine as though God stood there and they hear. He said no such thing takes place. He said God and I, we are one in knowledge. And referring to non-duality, that's an insight of the mystic. They perceive a non-duality. They don't. In other words, when this encounter with God, whether it be through naturally occurring mystical experience or psychedelically induced mystical experience, the version that you get of God in front of DMT is not some kind of Zeus-like being. There's a fusion that takes place in consciousness, in which consciousness can no longer identify with the material body. It becomes all things. It becomes a block universe. It becomes the omnipresence, the omniscience. It's permeated with unconditional love. There is no distinction to be made. There's no subject object. There's no you could say everything's subjective or everything's objective. It makes no difference from the vantage point. And it's a temporary experience. Like I said, the ego death. And when people come back, they feel like a rebirth. They feel like somehow the memory has been transplanted into their mind in this rebirth, because it was some experience that you can't necessarily relate to with the ego. Like I said, it's an ego death. The ego must necessarily die in order to have that revelation, and that revelation is necessarily temporary, because you eventually come back and into this egoic form, and you feel people have this sense of rebirth. They feel like they've been shot out to the edge of the universe, and now they have to come back, and they have to go back to their workaday they have to go to work the next day. Or, there's been memes like that. But
what do you think of a gradual approach to enlightenment, where over a period of a number of years or decades, you slowly lose your ego and you basically approach it gradually? They call it gradual spiritual experience. I think William James talks
yeah,
about it. I know it's really a big
I,
thing in AA. Bill Wilson
I
was
can
very
see.
interested in that.
Oh yeah, I can see AA like that. I can see like modern, things developing like that. Like a lot of the researchers, like one of their hopes is that they can finally legalize these substances and they can produce it for the average guy on the street who's going through depression. That's their ultimate goal. But I think you can integrate it like this, and I think there's efforts that are being made towards integrating these things. But at the same time, there was something else I want to add it. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think it should be available in the same way that Netflix and HBO and Showtime are. You should be able to subscribe to it because.
No, I agree. I've had criticism though. Like they're like, no, people are nuts. They're not going to be able to handle it. I don't think that's necessarily the way they're going to put it out. Like if you actually listen to these professionals speak or these lectures, they say that of course their effort is legalization. They want to make it available to anyone who has depression, anyone who's experiencing anxiety, and there's a lot of people out there that are experiencing that, and so their goal is to facilitate it. In other words, it's not going to be willy-nilly available to everyone. They're going to have psychedelic clinics that people can attend, where professionals who are trained can cultivate a positive experience.
I think it should be a tool of psychologists. That psychologists should be licensed to use it and whatever. But anyway,
I think that's the route it's taking. I think that's the route it's taking.
Yeah, I'm trying to pay attention to chat a little bit. Jay has a question. What is God and how is it necessary for reality? How would you answer that?
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, like I said, like a lot of, I really adhere to Paul Tillich. He said, I don't mean to put down atheists, but he said the root of atheism is a naive grasp or understanding of what God is. Like, in other words, like if you assume that God is this Santa Claus, the supernatural Santa Claus, then of course you're going to reject him. Like in other words, there's a spectrum of meaning in which God can make sense. And on the one side of the spectrum, God is completely incoherent, doesn't make sense at all. I should reject him entirely. But on the other side of the spectrum, you have more sophisticated you have a more sophisticated understanding of what God is.
Well, why do you need a God?
When I talk about that, I talk about the way Einstein talk. Well, that's what I'm getting to. That the way Einstein spoke towards Spinoza or Meister Eckhart spoke towards the Godhead. In other words, they considered God as the ground of being. It is everything that we perceive is like a part, like Leo was saying with panentheism, part and parcel of God. And
what is that
so the collective or some.
My cat wants to walk on my iPad.
Well, what do you?
Why is that different from the universe?
What do you?
Really?
What are you defining? Well, let's get into this. What are you defining as the universe? Are you saying the universe as something finite that begins at the Big Bang and ends somewhere else? Are you saying the universe as you know it, as you experience it from day to day, time to time? How do you define the universe?
The universe for me is, my locality, basically my physical existence in this life. And then beyond that, of course, I can rationalize and learn what we've learned about cosmology and what we've learned about physics. I can extrapolate that. And of course, I would say that the universe is infinite. But the universe for me, as a being who has not learned, if I had not learned anything about physics or whatever, it's just the world around me, the physical objects around me, and myself. My body as a physical object, and the other people moving through it. So that's a universe. So why is that? Why? So if you when you okay, if I were to extrapolate out and come up with a rationalization of the universe based on what I know about cosmology and physics, how is that any different than saying, oh, that's God? God is everything. God is the basis. God is the essence. Universe is the essence. Why is that any different? What is different between you and a naturalist like myself?
It may be a difference. Well, it could either be a difference in understanding, or it could be a difference in semantics, and we'll see how far that goes. Like, in other words, like I said, even Alan Watts would say that to not have a mystical experience is a major handicap, and the sense that he meant that in is that if you don't have an experience that reveals the integral unity in nature, how everything is ultimately one in some very profound sense, then you're liable to get a leg up on nature. You're liable to destroy nature, because you don't see it as a unity. You see it as something you can take advantage of.
Well, if you
And
see yourself as separate from the unit, if you see yourself as oh shit, separate from the universe, cat hair, then you will end up in this dualism, basically, where it's you,
yes,
as your consciousness inside the universe. But I see you doing the same thing, except in a more
yes.
magical, expansive way. You're
No, I
dragging
disagree.
the rest of the
I,
universe in with you and try to
I
say it's your.
disagree. No, I disagree. I think, I mean, because I think the difficulty here is maybe you claim this experience with LSD. Would you say that you had any resonance with the notion of non-duality, which has many names in all the major religions, but that term is very strong with Eastern religion?
Yeah, well, by the time I did LSD, I had had a religious experience myself naturally. I had read for some from the time I was like 12 or 13 about LSD, and then from about 15 until 19, when I actually did LSD, I read every Ellen Watts book and tons of Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. So I was prepared basically. And when I took LSD, every time I took it, I had that non-dual experience where I could just melt into, as Nathan Artwork put it, going with the flow. Except I didn't try to go with the flow. I just went with it. When you take the drug, is basically you enter the flow. You don't have to try to flow like we normally do with our
Yes.
lives, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So
Well,
letting go of ego
uh,
became very common for me. So it was easy to do. I used it in my
well,
recovery from alcohol and drugs several times. And when I went back to alcohol and drugs, I used it again when I came out of it, but it happened every time, basically. So I don't see the
it
need
might
for
be.
I don't see the need for all the
Well, I
dogma.
mean, we can venture.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, it might be, if we may venture into semantics a little bit. One of my favorite things that Watts would point out is that he would say often that it all depends on where you place your identity. And he said either you're little old me, referring to the skin encapsulated ego, or you define yourself as the totality. And I'm not saying, to give it a quick analogy, I'm not saying that hard determinism is the case, but let's say it is, right? And that the whole universe is fully determined from start to end, whatever, or maybe start to never ending, however you want to perceive it. And so if you place your identity in the ego, you're just placing your identity in an array of patterns that are already kind of fixated or frozen into a larger spectrum of patterns that are already there. So in other words, the mystic doesn't identify with the patterns coming out of the ego. They identify with the entire spectrum. And so it becomes then where you place your identity. The ego you have to remember that the mystic doesn't identify with the material body because they have this vision where they perceive a perception, a transcendent experience that is outside of space and time, meaning that it's inclusive of all space and time. They see themselves as a unity with all. Ramana Maharshi, the spiritual master, I tried to mention this earlier in, I think, Deconverted Man stream. I said the Ramana Maharshi, I don't know if you're familiar with him. They asked him once, he's a practitioner of yoga, and he was a Hindu master, and they asked him, how do we treat the others? And his answer was, there are no others. And he wasn't trying to be philosophically vague or trying to use this obscure metaphor. He was answering honestly out of his mystic perspective. Like, in other words, the mystics see reality as a divine unity. They as a seamless connectedness. They call it the divine ground of being, and we perceive it in time. We perceive it as unfolding. Like, it's I talk to you, you talk to me. Everything's unfolding in time, but from the mystic's vantage point, everything is seamlessly connected in time. It is the block universe. In other words, their identity is in the block universe. They don't perceive their identity in the egoic human being. Their identity is the block universe because that's where their consciousness operates from. And so, because everything is a unity, and it's in the background is complete, infinite, unconditional love. There is no reason to harm another entity. There's no reason to get a leg up on, to sin, to steal, to rape, to murder, because everything is seen as one. And so when the mystic returns, to the body, to the material essence, they feel spiritually reborn. And this is the way in life of Christ, of Jesus. I wouldn't never claim to be Christ-like or Jesus-like, but it is the aspiration of every single Christian is to be this man or woman of ultimate probity, ultimate honesty, and
you don't think atheists have that aspiration?
Not necessarily, not entirely, man. I think they are good. I think they're good without God to a certain extent, but I don't think they're perfect without God, and which is the aspiration of Christians. But at the same time, to be fair, I don't think a lot of Christians are perfect in that sense. They fall very short of the example of Christ.
Well, Christians are worried about their own souls and what their souls are going to be doing after they die. How can they possibly be anything like what we're talking about here? This egoless thing.
That's why. Hey, that's why in the beginning I mentioned Bill Maher and the way the average kind of Christian just kind of reads scripture as a software license. They kind of just scroll down and press I agree. Like the reason I mentioned that is because George Carlin put it best in my opinion. He said, well, many people are fucking dumb. Shall we adopt all their standards? I love that. That's the best way to put it, I think.
Christianity. Okay. Did you read about how Ellen Watts saw Christianity as being the ultimate game of basically anti-spirituality? It was the ultimate game of evil.
Yeah.
Where you scare the shit out of yourself, and then one day you wake up and say, like, his idea was that you go through life and you're worried about, oh my God, am I going to go to hell? Am I going to be judged? Am I going to go to heaven? And then when you die, you get up there, you go through the pearly gates, and you walk into this giant hall, and there's this giant God, mean-looking God standing in front of you that's going to judge you. And he looks at you, and he's got this stern look on his face, and you walk up trembling, waiting for your entire life to be assessed and judged. And all of a sudden he smiles and slaps you on the back and says, we were only kidding. It's a joke. It's like none of it was serious. We weren't serious about any of that. So anyway, that is Ellen Watts' depiction of waking up from the Christian nightmare, which he considered a nightmare.
Adam Watts did say that when you achieve enlightenment, nothing has left you at that moment but to laugh. because you have this insight of what God really is, and you see what people are arguing over, and you see the joke in it. You see, and I mean, I think one of Watt's major contention against Christianity was that a lot of Christians pedestalize Christ. In other words, Christ is supposed to be this divine man and God at the same time, and so they restrict it to like, oh no, only Jesus is safe for this for these qualities. But what I think what they overlook is that there's a lot of interpretations of Christianity where even Christ himself in John 10:34, haven't I said in your book that you are gods? Christ said it himself. In other words, the divine in Christ is not exclusive to Christ. It's universal to everyone. And as long as you pedestalize Christ, you're going to deny the divinity within yourself.
Well, Watts fleshed out Christ as sort of a message that basically you drink the blood and you eat the cracker and you become one with God. And Christ said he was God, and basically you become one with Christ. And then he was talking about how Christianity was sort of the New Testament answer to bring Buddhist mysticism back into Old Testament darkness. But anyway, hang on a second here. I got some. Cel Cordova, so you think UFOs are demons? Is that what you're telling me? Could you answer that in chat, please? Because I'm really curious about that statement. UFOs are demons. That would be an interesting one. Let's see. JS, if you can demonstrate the necessity of a particular God. And I think I kind of know what that's going to do to your head, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of like a strawmanning question. Like, Neil deGrasse Tyson was once asked, like, from, I think it was Bill Maher. No, it wasn't Bill Maher. I'm sorry. It was Richard Colbert. The Colbert Show. And Colbert asked him, how does something arise from nothing? Or how do we get something from nothing? And Neil deGrasse Tyson answered, words that make. Colbert challenged him to answer the question in 10 words or less. Stephen Colbert, thank you. Stephen Colbert challenged Richard Dawkins to answer that question in 10 words or less. And Neil deGrasse Tyson said, words that make questions may not be questions at all, which is exactly 10 words. And I think applies to his question. Like he says, how does it demonstrate the necessity of a particular God? I think atheists confuse themselves that only one God should be true. This completely denies Prisa Theologia or perennial philosophy, which a lot of atheists don't look into. They don't look into the perennial philosophy. They don't see that all religion could be sourced in one source. In other words, we're talking about natural human beings. We're talking about a phenomenon in consciousness that exists throughout millennia, cross-culturally, across times and cultures. It doesn't matter if you pull a complete mystical experience out from 2020, or you pull a complete mystical experience out from the 1600s or the 1400s or 500 BC or 10,000 BC. They're one and the same. They're one and the same phenomenon in consciousness. That's the point. And okay. I think that's what the science is.
Okay. We got to start wrapping up pretty soon, but I want to kind of go through something. Basically, everything you've said so far hashes out to what I think. If you take naturalism and science and what we know about the universe and physicality, basically the physical universe, if you extend it to its logical conclusion, you end up in exactly the same way with this ego melting. But what you just said to Jay is what I'm saying to you. It's a change of perspective. You have to rid of what you think you know about God. In fact,
yes, exactly.
Then you would drop it completely. So,
yes, because in this experience,
I drew a rather elaborate diagram here. So you've got your occipital lobe here, And, basically everything from your eyes comes in there. And for humans, the occipital lobe is a very big thing. Thor, I don't need you right now. My cat is trying to help. And it splits into two paths, dorsal path and the ventral path down here. And the ventral path is kind of like, what is it? Like, what is the object? The dorsal path is like, where is it? What is it doing? How is it moving? That's just a really idealized notion of what happens. But anyway, it goes into the temporal lobe, and that's where you identify things in here, that sort of thing. But there's also something in your temporal lobe that builds a concept up in the rest of your cortex of ego, of what you are, okay? And the thalamus, of course, controls all that. But there is something called a temporal parietal junction, where basically this whole stream comes together and gives you a sense of where you are and what you're doing in the universe. If you put yourself on a boat in an ocean and it's wavy, and you're looking, basically you're looking at the walls in the boat, and you feel yourself moving up and down, but your eyes are telling you that you're not moving up and down. Your brain gets confused and you throw up. Well, basically, there are things like when you first do psychedelics, sometimes people have what they call a bad trip because all of the shit melts down. So all of your standard ideas that place you where you are and all of that melts down. And that's what we would expect psychedelics to do. And so psychedelics have that effect. Also, a good hit on the head or an epileptic seizure will have the same effect of causing this meltdown and CPG junction. So basically, you're experiencing life. All of a sudden, like I say, this program starts up every day when you get out of bed that says, "Oh, I'm Mike. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go do my weather report on YouTube. I got to read this. I got to do this. I got to let the cat out." Shit like that. So all of that melts down temporarily, and that's your ego. Your ego is like this concept that you've built up of who you are over time, and we get in the habit. Ellen Watts strikes out against this habit of constantly thinking about the future. Like, I want more stuff. I want more future. And that's where you get into your anxiety over death, right? So I had an experience probably about 15 years ago, something like that. I think I was using at the time. But I was driving down the street, and there was this little kid playing in the yard. And she all of a sudden hopped up and down, like skipping and hopping, and she hopped up the steps, and she looked like a little deer, and she was so happy. And suddenly I had this experience because at the time I was planning on killing myself. So I had this letting go of my life. And at the same time, I saw her, and I thought, as long as she's alive, I don't care if I am. And it was like this immense transfer of ego to all of the children in the world that are coming up in the world. And I no longer cared about my skin and about myself. And so it was also a sort of a mystical experience, even though I was fucked up at the time. But so anyway, this letting go of ego is a pretty natural psychological thing you can do. But it doesn't mean that the physical universe does not exist or that there's some consciousness involved. Your consciousness is something that is your brain, your body. My bodies are bad, and the world. So now the way I live is I think of the 50 feet around me and also my connections to you on the YouTube. So there's a Kafei out there somewhere. Okay. All of this is my consciousness. That's all me right now as I move through time. And I'm moving through time, but there will be a point when all of this blinks out and disappears, but it doesn't matter because it's happening somewhere.
Well, I mean, you're kind of summarizing what I was trying to say. Like, it all depends on where you place your identity. Are you just this little facet of egoic consciousness that is perceiving this window from eternity, or are you the totality? Are you the whole thing? And I think a lot of religious mystics, they place themselves in the totality. And
that is extreme atheism, naturalism. You don't need this concept of God. Other than that, it's everything around you. Basically.
Well, yeah, that's why I said totality, and not I didn't necessarily say God. I think you have maybe a vendetta towards the term God. You know,
No, I don't have a vendetta. I use the term God every week in AA. I talk about God, and I talk about all of that shit. It's just that I sum it up. It's just that I don't have a concept of God. I don't need a concept of God.
okay.
When I say God, I mean all that other stuff, everything.
All right. Well, the way I perceive the research is that it has the potential to ultimately unify the major religions. You know, like if it all ultimately derives from one source, then the major religions are going to have to harmonize in some sense. And I don't know. I find that possibility very. I don't know, man. Like world saving, I guess, because otherwise, we're left to like if you're like an adamant Christian.
What's that?
Yeah, if you're an adamant Christian and you solely believe that Christianity is the truth, and you're gonna be at war with everything else. But if you find a revelation in a source of truth for everything else, then you have a unity. So I don't know. I see it as a potential to.
But yeah, when you
maybe
like what Watts described it as concentrating, basically, like you live rationally, like you're thinking all the time, your mind is chattering, and you're building this constant ball of ego and rationalization. Okay, extreme atheism or naturalism, to its extension, says that that's bullshit. That doesn't really exist. You don't matter.
Well, I mean, at the same time, Adam Watts was also saying that the reason why he put emphasis on this placement of identity is because you can only recognize that you're in a skin encapsulated ego is if you continue to perceive yourself from that state. Like someone who has a mystical experience, they can no longer identify as that. That's why the background of unconditional love directs their steps. It's something that cultivates them to a higher morality, a paragon. They become moral paragons. In this regard.
You stop caring about
yes, yeah, and I think the whole idea of egotism is defining yourself as your senses, as what you can perceive, and not realizing the integral totality that's taking place. That you are one with something that you can't fathom the interconnectivity with unless you have some type of mystical experience and you directly experience that connectivity. It's not just some metaphor. You no longer identify with the material body because you identify with everything else. You are all things. That's why Ramana Maharshi says that how should we treat others? There are no others. Everything is one. You're your brother, your sister. Like you. In other words, you can't get a leg up. You can't rape. You can't murder someone. You can't steal for someone because they are ultimately you. And all the mystics express it that way.
Jay kind of touched on this a little while back, and somebody else did too. But basically, seeking can become a form of this loss of spirituality. If you spend your life like and I think what I've heard from you at least 2 years ago was that you wanted to keep trying drugs because you keep finding this. You're exactly where I was when I was in my 20s, and I was doing LSD and mushrooms and everything I get my hands on, trying to get this experience unnaturally through a pill.
But you're at an age. You're at an age where you would be accepted into the scientific studies. You're not, you know what I mean? Like you're not too old of an age where they would dismiss you. You would be gladly accepted into these studies.
Yeah, and as I progress through my old age, I want to do some work with mushrooms again because I want to. Like the one thing that psychedelics did for me at such an early age is they taught me how to see the world. Like I can go into the woods and I can let myself like fuzz out into the woods, into the universe, in a way I don't think was possible. I learned how to do that with psychedelics, basically. So I learned how to see. So I want to do some more work with that, and I also want to do a little more work with extreme letting go of my ego, because the thought of dying, like if I found out I had a tumor tomorrow, I would like to graciously accept that death, basically.
Yeah.
More graciously than I think I'm capable of right now, though I'm not sure, because I'm pretty fucking capable right now.
Well, I mean, that's what one thing psychedelics have been offering to these people who are at the edge, terminal cancer patients. They're able to completely rid of their fear of death. And, that's what the point I'm trying to say. Like, a lot of atheists are like, people believe in religion because they think they have an afterlife and they live forever. The mystics, they have no fear of death because they don't see an afterlife. Like it's very different. Like, they're not counting on an afterlife. They've already experienced death in a way, So that, like I said, it all depends on where you place your identity. It's not necessarily what's going to happen to you at death. As far as the mystic's concerned, he's already had it. In Islam, they call it fana. To die before you die.
Yeah, it seems like like all religions are hinting at the same thing, but they get trapped up in all this dogma, and that's always what I've been trying to convince you of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's surface level. It's surface level, man. Like what I'm trying to say. Like, if either you had a very profound experience with LSD, and you're able to resonate with all the scriptures of religion, or you haven't, and you're gonna find nonsense in it. The way I perceive it is completely integrated in complete sense of what's occurring right now.
Yeah. Like, okay, if like when I look at you and I listen to you and I see your interactions online, you've got this whole thing of Kafei versus atheism, and it's bullshit. When you are able to let go of that and admit that you are an atheist, as well as a mystic, then I think you will have arrived, my son.
No, I think you're right, because it's not. It can't be deduced to these type of statements, man. Like, even Einstein himself said that, the topic of atheism was one of the most difficult topics, and it's because either people have a lack of understanding, or I've spoken to Matt Dillahunty, and he was comparing to me. I shit you not. He was comparing the Holy Spirit to frisson, like the chills you get up your spine, and
deeper than that.
Yeah, it's way deeper than that. It goes into the mystical experience.
That becomes dogma too when atheists say, "Oh, like they absolutely hate the term spiritual atheist," which I identify with, and basically they're saying, "Okay, none of that woo shit at all." But that woo shit, okay, if you are a good atheist and how the hell do you spell atheist? God damn, I forgot. Okay, if you're a good atheist and you're a strict naturalist, then you will understand that you are not a little computer brain. You are not a reasoning, I call it a spirit mind, point source spirit mind. So point source spirit mind. So you'll understand that you are an organism in the world, that you're just a wisp of wind blowing around in the world. And you're a feeling wisp, and you should feel spiritual. That's one of the things humans can feel. It's very natural. And there are atheists that get too far into the rationality and into the ego. So you have your rational ego, and they are just as fucked up as, as far off the mark as the Christians are. They have their own dogma and belief, that sort of thing. So that's the kind of atheism that Alan Watts used to rail against in the 60s. It's this sort of reductive materialism where everything is just physical laws and whatever. No, the universe is fucking unbelievably complex and patterned. So, yes, I am a biological network.
Yes, and what I would say, I mean, towards your comment is that, like, someone like Paul Tillich, when he said the universe is complex and patterned.
Yeah.
I think when Paul Tillich talked about the ground of being is supposed to represent all patterns that the universe can represent.
Yeah, and you can imbibe of those patterns as much as you want, and they're it's what we do as long as we're alive. We're kind of pattern making machines.
In other words, it's like when Einstein. Well, people say, like, what's the point in worshiping God? Einstein, the way Einstein interpreted that was, he said, God, for me, studying the universe and its operations is, to me, studying the mind of God. That's how he phrased it. And a lot of people, a lot of atheists especially, I mean, a lot of theists too, but they can't see it that way.
It really pisses me off when people like Sal Cordova, who's in the chat right now, don't believe that the universe is capable of creating us.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's like saying, like, oh, you don't think an all powerful, all omniscient God can use evolution as its natural resource? It denies those sort of arguments. And I mean, not that I adhere to them, but at the same time, I feel they're inefficient. Like, the worst arguments I hate to hear against the existence of God are the most childish ones, like, the spaghetti monster or the Sky Daddy or whatever. I'm like, man, if you're talking about the Sky Daddy, then forget about it. I mean, like, the way. Well,
that actually describes what a lot of Christians think, though. They really think there's some anthropic thing.
It describes what. But to be fair, it describes what a lot of Christians think, and like I said with Bill Maher and how Christians they adhere to this software license, scroll down, hit the I agree button. At the same time, it adheres to atheists who their basis of atheism is the rejection of this God that these type of naive Christians are promulgating. You know what I mean? Like, it's the rejection of the Sky Daddy. It's a rejection of what even Richard Dawkins called the malevolent bully. Or what Dillahunty calls the mafia bully, or something. It's the same thing. It's
Jay mentioned something earlier. Someone newborn is aware of things their senses are receiving. They're basically, when you say aware of, that automatically gets into a duality, but basically your senses are receiving, and it doesn't mean you know what they are. Ellen Watts made a big deal of that basically when we identify something with a word, that we are mistaking the finger for the moon. But we got to wrap this up. I have to go have some stew. So anyway, but that's interesting, and I think LSD very much puts you back into the state that you were in when you were a newborn. If you take enough, it's exactly like it would be to be a newborn, popped out into the world, and all of a sudden all this shit is happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree, man. One point that, I mean, before you ended, that I don't think we went into a major point that a lot of people don't get is because it's kind of hard to not understand it without directly experiencing it for yourself, is non-dualism. It's the subject, because most people have this idea in their ordinary state of consciousness where they're the subject and object of their mind. Like, I experience things subjectively, I'm approaching this stream, I'm looking at the screen, I'm looking at the sink, I'm looking at whatever. What people don't realize is that in spirituality there is a dissolution or complete dissolving of those two factors, the subjectivity and the objectivity, such that there is no longer an objective and a subjective. It is literally all one from a certain vantage point. And a lot of people haven't experienced that. I think that's one of the main goals. I would love to, before you go, Speed of Sound, I would love to start a show called DMT as opposed to TMZ, where we get famous people and we just dose them with high doses of DMT and see what happens. And
that would be pretty cool.
like we can invite some of the atheists that were in the chat to the stream too.
My first victim is Donald Trump.
Oh yeah. Have you seen? There was a man, the comedian. I forget his name, but he did a video of if Donald Trump tried ayahuasca. Have you seen it?
No, I'd like to see it though. Anyway, okay, so let's end the live part of this, and I'll just talk to you for a few minutes behind screen.
Cool. Hell yeah.
We've done about we did 2 hours. How about that shit? I thought I was going to fire you after 15 minutes.
Man, it was a very interesting discussion, and to the point where I would love to talk to you again, man.
Well, I'd like
elaborate on these topics.
One of the interests I have is these misunderstandings of atheism, and there's equally a misunderstanding of spirituality and atheism on both sides, and I'm not sure.
I agree.
Christians think we're fucking.
We should get into that.
Well, Smokey, I call him Stinky Snake. He thinks we're like demons, and it's just.
I absolutely agree with you. I think if we got into that, we could further clarify their positions. Because I don't even think they've come to terms where they lie with that. So if we could find a common ground, maybe they could find a common ground.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna end live. Okay. So goodbye, everybody in chat. Thank you all for stopping in. So
yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say that.
Thank you, Speed, for inviting me, man. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'm gonna end the broadcast.